Elder Zarathul's aged hands trembled as she activated the emergency beacon, its crimson light casting desperate shadows across the command center of New Thyros. Around her, the last defenders of her people worked frantically at their stations, their bioluminescent markings flickering with exhaustion and fear. Elder, reported communications specialist Kethron, the Syndicate fleet has broken through our outer defenses. We have perhaps 6 hours before they reach the civilian sectors. Zarathul nodded grimly. The Orion Syndicate had been systematically conquering independent worlds for months, strip mining planets and enslaving populations to fuel their war machine. The peaceful Thyrosians, with their focus on art, philosophy, and scientific research, had never stood a chance against such organized brutality. "Any response from the Galactic Council?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "The Council declares the situation regrettable, but states that intervention would violate the non-interference protocols," Kethran replied bitterly. "The other systems that still have functional militaries are too afraid of Syndicate retaliation to act." Zarathul closed her ancient eyes, feeling the weight of her people's fate settling on her shoulders. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. "Elder?" Kethran looked confused. "Ma'am, did you activate something?" "I sent a message," Zarathul said quietly. "A very old message, on a very old frequency, to a very old friend." She walked slowly to the central viewing port, gazing out at the blue-green world that had been her people's home for millennia. "Tell me, Kethran, do you know the story of Marcus Chen?" The younger Thyrosian's head tentacles curled in confusion. "The name sounds familiar, but—" 37 years ago, Zarathul began, her voice carrying the weight of memory. "I was not an elder. I was merely a junior engineer aboard a deep space research vessel. We encountered a severely damaged human scout ship in the Outer Rim, drifting without power, life support failing." She traced patterns in the condensation on the viewport as she spoke. The human Marcus Chen was barely alive. His ship had been attacked by pirates, his crew was dead, and he had perhaps hours before his remaining systems failed completely. "What did you do?" Kethran asked, genuinely curious despite their dire circumstances. "What any decent being would do," Zarathul replied. "We rescued him, brought him aboard, shared our medical resources, our food, our knowledge. He stayed with us for 3 months while we helped him repair his ship and provided him with supplies for his journey home." She turned from the viewport, her eyes bright with something that wasn't quite sadness. The captain wanted to simply drop him at the nearest space station and be done with it. But I argued that we should do more, help him properly, treat him as family. The human had such intensity about him, such determination. He spoke constantly of his duty, his mission, his people. "And he left?" Kethran prompted. "Eventually, yes. But before he departed, he did something remarkable." Zarathul activated a small personal hologram, showing an image of a much younger version of herself standing next to a human in a worn spacesuit. "He gave me his personal communication codes and made me a promise. He said that if I or my people ever needed help, truly needed help, I should call him." Kethran stared at the image. "But Elder, that was over 3 decades ago. Humans have short lifespans, and even if he was still alive—" Marcus Chen rose through the ranks of something called the United Earth Space Command, Zarathul interrupted. "I kept track of him over the years. Occasionally, we would exchange messages. He would tell me about his promotions, his family, his service. I would share news of our research, our discoveries." She smiled at the memory. "He always ended his messages the same way. 'The debt stands, my friend.' Always." An alarm sounded through the command center, and tactical displays showed the Syndicate fleet advancing steadily toward their world. "Elder," Kethran said desperately, "even if your human friend was still alive, even if he wanted to help, what could one person do against an entire invasion fleet?" Before Zarathul could answer, the communications array erupted with an incoming signal. The voice that emerged was older, rougher than she remembered, but unmistakably familiar. Elder Zarathul, this is Admiral Marcus Chen of the United Earth Space Command. We received your message. The command center fell silent, except for the background hum of electronics. Marcus? Zarathul whispered. But you're older, grayer, and considerably more stubborn than when we first met. Admiral Chen replied with obvious warmth. But still breathing, and still remembering my debts. Tell me about your situation. Zarathul quickly outlined the syndicate threat, the overwhelming odds, the abandonment by the galactic community. When she finished, there was a long pause. Admiral, she said finally, I know this is asking too much. You have your own people to protect, your own responsibilities. Zarathul, Admiral Chen interrupted, his voice carrying a tone of absolute certainty. 37 years ago, you and your people saved my life when you had no obligation to do so. You treated a stranger with kindness, dignity, and respect. You gave me hope when I had none. Another pause, and when he spoke again, there was something in his voice that made Kethran's species markings flare with primitive recognition, the sound of a predator announcing its presence. Now let me tell you what that kindness has become. The main viewing screen activated, showing long-range sensors pointed toward the edge of the system. What they revealed made every being in the command center gasp in shock. Ships. Hundreds of them. The sleek, aggressive lines of human warships dropping out of hyperspace, in perfect formation, their weapons already charging, their hulls bearing the insignia of the United Earth Space Command. 37 years ago, I was Lieutenant Chen of a single scout ship. Admiral Chen's voice continued. Today, I command the 5th Fleet of the UESC. And every captain in my fleet knows the story of the Thyrosians, who saved a stranded human and asked for nothing in return. On the tactical display, the human fleet was moving with lethal precision toward the syndicate forces, their approach vectors calculated for maximum impact. More than that, Admiral Chen added, I've spent 4 decades telling that story to anyone who would listen. It spread through our military, our government, our people. The Thyrosians became legend among humans, the aliens who proved that honor and kindness exist in the galaxy. Zarathul watched in amazement as the human fleet engaged the syndicate forces. The pirates, accustomed to facing poorly defended civilian targets, found themselves suddenly confronting warships designed by a species that had been preparing for interstellar warfare since before they'd even left their homeworld. Admiral, she managed, this is an entire fleet. The expense, the risk to your people. Elder Zarathul, Admiral Chen said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Do you know what humans call a debt that spans generations? We call it tradition. And we have a tradition that says, when the Thyrosians call, humanity answers. The battle was swift and decisive. The syndicate fleet, caught completely off guard by the sudden arrival of a superior force, was routed within hours. As the human ships maintained defensive positions around New Thyros, Admiral Chen's final transmission carried the weight of absolute sincerity. The debt is paid, old friend, but the friendship is eternal. Elder Zarathul stood at the viewing port, watching human and Thyrosian ships working together to clear the battlefield, and smiled through her tears. Sometimes, she reflected, the smallest acts of kindness echo across the stars.